bunker that should stay closed. The forest in coastal Washington had a quiet that ate its own echo. Dr. Mara Ellison stood with one hand on the lichen-crusted steel hatch and the other on a clipboard. Behind her waited the team: Theo with microphones, Ruth with archives, Jamal with tools, Elena with a lens, 5 people who believed history behaves when labeled. They found the hatch by following what should not be there: concrete where ferns should be rusted, eye bolts in bedrock, a hand-painted warning: prohibited federal storage. Locals whispered about a World War II bunker used for interrogations, never meant to be admitted. From somewhere deep below, a faint metallic rattle traveled up through the hatch, like a chain dragged once across a concrete floor. Jamal's jaw tightened. "Thermal shift," he said. He did not sound convinced. Theo powered his field recorder. "Check, check," he said, and the device replied with a neat little chirp that felt too cheerful for this place. Elena rolled video the red record light, a warning. The hatch had 2 wheel valves and a locking bar. Jamal worked the bar until his shoulders shook. Metal answered with a long, toothy groan, like a door remembering it had once learned to scream. "Warped," he huffed. Mara took the wheel. "On 3, she said. We open together. We stay together. No hero moves." The hatch surrendered with a wet sigh of ancient seals. Air rushed out like a bad memory, carrying a sour blend of oil ash and something that made their tongues taste like pennies. Far inside, a drop began to fall, tap, pause, tap, like time wearing a leaky mask. They went down into a corridor that sweated. Pipes ran the ceiling. Every 15 feet, a steel door with a viewing slot and a serial number. A placard greeted them: "Detainees Silence Order." From behind the first door came a polite, unmistakable tap, as soft as a knuckle-testing glass, once, twice, 3 times. Theo checked his levels. The recorder grew a thin hiss, the kind that makes you think rooms can breathe. Jamal muttered contraction and kept his eyes on the hinges. They opened the first cell cot table, a chain anchored to the floor, with links as thick as thumbs. Elena filmed a slow circle. When the doors shifted, the chain made a scraping scuff against concrete, a sound with no clear owner, like a habit the room refused to unlearn. Mara wrote the chain's serial number as if writing could domesticate it. In the second cell, Ruth found a wall full of tally marks, grouped in 5s, until the clusters dissolved into a storm. Beneath them, tiny letters pressed with desperate patience: "Do not answer the question." What question, Theo asked. No one offered one. They reached a larger room where a ceiling fan, big as a starfish, hung dusty. A bulletin board still clutched a roster with names blacked out. A table held a perforated hood and restraints. "Acoustic veil," Ruth said. "You force the subject to hear only what you allow." Jamal found the generator room and eyed the diesel. "We could get light." Mara compromised. 60 seconds on auxiliary, then out. When the generator caught, it coughed twice and settled into a low, reluctant thrum that made the floor vibrate like a drum skin. Bulbs stuttered to life, staining the world amber. The last hour of whoever worked here was still on the tables: an upturned chair, a mug stuck to a ring of dried liquid, an ashtray crushed to paper. No blood, just the geometry of pressure and fear. The records room was locked. Jamal's wrench made access. Shelves leaned under manila files. Elena filmed as Ruth opened the first folder photographs of this facility labeled "Subject" and a number. Faces hidden by the hood. Hands strapped. From the hallway, something heavy shifted, a drag, a bump. The sound of a chain remembering a path. Theo spun. Then, as if the building had been waiting for permission, a voice came thin through the vents. Don't answer. Another followed deeper, rougher answer. Jamal killed the generator. The thrum died, and in the sudden dark, the big fan clicked down, tick, 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 until silence perched again. Headlamps cut shaky cones. Mara led them to the central chamber. The floor was grated metal over a drain. The walls were padded to smother reflection. In the center stood a chair, bolted to the floor. Above it, old speakers turned their mouths toward the seat. A gloss of whispers rose in the padding. No words, only weather made of voices. Theo set the recorder on the armrest. Under the static, he heard a morse of sounds. He swallowed the paper-thin sound of someone working to keep quiet. The speakers breathed. A filament of sound, fragile as a moth's wing, slid out. How much can you endure? No one answered. Somewhere behind the walls, a steady weeping began, as if the building had stored tears and found a leak. "We have enough," Jamal said. Mara nodded, even as the room acted like it heard. A bolt slammed into place beneath the grating, one hard final clack that drove through their boots. Down the corridor, multiple chains woke links chattering in clinks and skittering scrapes like metal learning to breathe again. They turned toward the stair. It had not moved. They had. Behind them, the door closed with a courteous hush, like a hand settling over a mouth. Elena caught the edge of it on camera. Ruth raised both palms. Whatever asks next, don't answer. Pressure arrived, like a low note too big for ears, thickening the air until their own heartbeats sounded like hammers. Over that pulse crept a new noise, a structural scream, steel confessing under stress. Mara steadied her breath. "We map and we leave," she said. From deep below, something began to drag, remembered it, had time. They were 5 in a room designed for 1. They were loud with life. And the bunker had not forgotten what to do with that. The second hour in the bunker felt longer than their whole hike to reach it. The walls sweated like lungs, the air clogged like old cloth. The team pushed deeper, though each step felt like it wasn't theirs anymore. At the junction hall, the rusted pipes above them trembled. From within the pipes came the faintest rattle, like coins in a tin can being rolled slowly back and forth. Theo swung the recorder toward the ceiling. Through the headphones, the sound was magnified metal on metal, rapid breathing. Jamal cursed softly. It's settling. Metal fatigue. But his eyes betrayed him. He didn't believe it. They entered a chamber marked containment. Inside, hooks dangled from the ceiling, their shadows twitching against the cracked tiles. A table leaned sideways with straps still buckled. Elena zoomed in, catching the close-up of the straps rubbed smooth by wrists long gone. A sudden snap echoed sharp as a whip cracked, the sound of one hook swinging on its own. The chain clinked in lazy arcs, even though no wind reached here. Elena whispered. It moved. No one argued. On the wall, Ruth found scratched letters. We were 5. One by one, the chains took us. Theo's breath caught. 5. That's us. The recorder picked up a low groan with a long exhale forced through clenched teeth. Mara spun light, searching corners, but there was only darkness glued to stone. They pressed forward to the infirmary. Rows of rusted beds crouched against the wall frames, eaten with orange decay. On one mattress, the outline of a body burned itself into the fabric, an imprint darker than mold, darker than time. As they entered, the sound rose, leather straining metal, tightening, and a voice muffled by gagging cloth. No. Tighter. Tighter. Ruth slapped her ears. Turn it off, she begged Theo. But the recorder wasn't on playback. It was live. Jamal gripped the wrench like a weapon. We're not the first here. That much is obvious. Mara shook her head. We document, then we leave. But her voice lacked conviction. In the next chamber lay barrels scorched black, their lids warped. Chemical stink coiled through the room. Elena's camera lens fogged, then cleared as if the air itself had fingers. From the barrels, a thick gurgle rose, the sound of liquid bubbling in a throat too damaged to swallow. Theo stumbled back, hitting a stretcher. The stretcher wheels shrieked against the tile, rolling a foot without a push. They returned to the central corridor, silent but for their breath. That's when the first true voice came. A cry tore out of the darkness, raw and jagged, the kind that stripped the throat bare. Let me out. The sound bounced off every wall until it was impossible to tell direction. Chains clattered in, answer a chorus of irons screaming against its bolts. Ruth clutched Mara's sleeve. We should never have opened this place. Another sound erupted, iron links twisting, wrenching, grinding, until sparks of echo flew. One by one, the cells began to sing with movement. Somewhere, a metal door slammed hard, finally like a judge striking wood. The team tried for the stair, but the air changed. It thickened. A moan floated through the corridor, long and broken, stitched with sobs, voices layered, prisoners without lungs, forcing breath from stone. Theo caught it all. The recorder's red light pulsed like a heartbeat, and beneath the moan, a quieter sound persisted, a rasping drag steady as footsteps, but heavier like shackles being pulled toward them inch by inch. Mara raised her light. Stay together. Don't answer. Don't. Her command was drowned by a shriek so sharp it peeled the air, the shriek of steel bending against its will. From the far end of the corridor, the grating whine of chains sliding free answered her words. The five of them froze. The bunker had begun to remember its work, and the chains were wide awake. The corridor seemed longer than when they entered, as if the walls stretched to keep them, and every light beam from their headlamps swam in a haze that felt alive, pulsing like veins beneath stone. They pressed forward, hearts pounding, their breaths uneven, when Ruth whispered that she could hear more than their own steps, and at once the others fell still. From the darkness ahead came the deliberate drag of a chain links, grinding one after the other, slow and merciless, a rhythm that belonged to something patient and cruel. Theo lifted the recorder higher, his hands trembling, and though the device already glowed red with capture, he pressed closer to Mara, whispering that the sound was no longer only entering the mic, it was whispering back into his ears. He swore he heard beneath the chain a wet shuffle like bare feet dragging through puddles of old blood. The air grew thick, tasted metallic, and the walls exhaled coldness, the kind that entered marrow instead of skin. Jamal muttered that they needed to turn around, but Mara shook her head and ordered them forward toward the chamber with the grated floor they had first seen, the one with the bolted chair, because she needed proof, and proof always outweighed fear in her world. But this was not her world anymore. They entered their lights, catching the metal seat straps dangling like tongues, shadows rising like executioner. Theo bent to place the recorder back onto the chair arm, but as his hand lowered, a clang exploded against the grate below, a chain yanking taut as if from beneath the floor, the echo booming like thunder trapped in a coffin. He jumped back, and Ruth screamed, covering her mouth too late. At once, the speakers on the wall sputtered alive, vomiting a hiss that grew into voices, screams upon screams, hoarse men begging, women wailing, and the agonized chorus of 100 throats scoured raw. Elena's camera shook in her hand as she tried to film her lens, capturing only darkness rippling across the padding like liquid shadows. Jamal swung the wrench toward the chair, shouting at nothing, but Mara ordered calm, even as her voice quivered. Then the grate beneath their boots shuddered, rattling with the iron weight of something hammering from below, the pounding like skulls, crushed one after another. Theo shouted that they had to leave, that they had enough. But before anyone could move, a sudden force snapped through the room. Chains whipped up from the grate like snakes, uncoiling the links, striking the walls with sharp cracks that the air splitting with metallic shrieks. One coiled around Theo's arm and yanked him against the chair with such violence. His bone cracked audibly, his scream rising above the others. The sound of the chain tightening was merciless, grinding, squealing, as it coiled tighter ribs, snapping under invisible weight. The wet crunch of cartilage breaking. The others lunged to free him, Jamal swinging his wrench wildly, Elena clawing at the chain with bare hands, Ruth pulling at his legs. But the links were like living things, serpents that only laughed in metal. Theo's scream choked, transforming into a gargle as the chain tightened around his chest, crushing his lungs until the scream collapsed into silence. What followed was the revolting squelch of his body giving way, bones grinding into paste, and then the sudden rip of flesh tearing as the chain dragged what was left down through the grate. His recorder fell and clattered, still glowing red, capturing the echoes of the horror as though nothing had happened. Elena vomited against the padded wall, sobbing that it wasn't real, it couldn't be real, while Ruth clawed her own skin as though trying to peel away the sound. Mara gripped Jamal's arm, shouting at them to hold together, but her command was drowned because the speakers exploded again with shrieks. Theo's own scream replayed, looped, twisted with laughter, not his own, the sound deforming, until it became the rattling chant of dozens of voices whispering, "Answer, answer, answer." Jamal slammed his hands to his ears, shaking his head, tears cutting through dust on his face. But he still staggered to Mara, insisting they move, insisting the stair was the only way. Ruth fell behind, staring at the recorder, still glowing red on the chair, its tiny light pulsing, as if in heartbeat with the bunker. They ran from the chamber lights, trembling across the walls. But the corridor no longer obeyed space. It shifted, doubled, stretched into impossible lengths, each step echoing back at them too late, as if their sounds arrived after their bodies. From every cell door came the chorus of iron scratching concrete chains being dragged closer, closer, accompanied by wet, sobbing, gagged cries, the pleading rhythm of 100 prisoners rehearsing their last moments. Elena screamed at them to stop. That running was worse, because the sound of pursuit was everywhere. The slam of shackles against walls, the snapping rattle of locks breaking, the thunder of unseen fists hammering iron doors. Mara dragged her forward, whispering that to stop was death, though every direction already smelled of death. They reached the infirmary again, and the outline on the mattress now sat upright, the dark imprint swelling shoulders forming out of shadow. A groan slid out of the figure's non-existent mouth, long and low, like lungs inhaling fire after centuries. Ruth froze, whispering Theo's name, insisting it was him, but when the head turned hollow, sockets gaped where eyes should have been, and chains slithered from its wrists to the floor. The clinking of those chains was louder than breath, louder than thought, each link dragging like nails over their skulls. The thing stood impossibly tall, its chest splitting with the sound of ribs cracking open, and Jamal dragged Ruth away just as the chain lashed out, slicing the bed frame in half with a scream of tearing steel. They fled again, but the bunker had already claimed Theo, and now it hungered for the rest. The stair loomed in the distance, a rectangular promise of escape, and they hurled themselves toward it, ignoring that each step they took, the stair seemed no closer. Behind them, The pounding footsteps grew metal against stone-wet drags, the howls of tortured men, screaming through mouths full of iron, women shrieking as if flames licked them. Still the symphony of the dead, conducting their agony through echo. Elena dropped her camera in panic, its light flickering across the walls before dying. And she wailed that she had lost proof, lost everything. But Ruth shrieked that proof was not worth her life and that none of them would leave with either. Suddenly, the entire corridor shook steel beams, groaning pipes exploding with a hiss of scalding steam. And in the chaos, a door slammed behind them with a finality that reverberated like a hammer on coffins. They had been cut off. The stair was gone. The walls trembled with satisfaction. Mara, gasping, held them close, whispering they had to keep their minds that it was all sound, all illusion, all history replaying nothing more. But even as she said it, she knew the chains had touched Theo, broken him, taken him beyond sound. The air thickened with more noise dripping, as if blood fell from ceilings, as the relentless scrape of chairs moving where no hands pushed them, the creak of hooks swaying. Now the air was still, and under it, all the endless screams stretched thin, woven into the bunker's stone like mortar. They stood surrounded, waiting for the next strike, waiting for the next death, their ears bleeding not from volume, but from despair. Theo was gone. 4 remained. And the bunker had only begun to eat. They huddled together in the corridor. 4 left their faces streaked with sweat and dust. Though Mara tried to steady her voice, every word quivered with the certainty that what had taken Theo was not finished. They pushed forward into another wing, marked with faded stencils that read, "Experimental Holding." And as the rusted door opened under Jamal's wrench, a deep groan rolled through the hallway. The sound of steel complaining like an animal woken from centuries of sleep. Inside the room was darker, the walls blackened, scorched in ways no flame should have reached, as though the stones themselves had been cooked alive. Elena's light swept over the corners and caught the outlines of metal restraints bolted into the wall, twisted, melted, still smelling faintly of ash, even after decades. Ruth whispered that it was impossible, but the odor of burned flesh lingered sour and undeniable. Then from somewhere deep in the stone came a whisper of crackling like kindling catching fire, though no spark had been struck. They all froze, eyes darting around the room, but the shadows remained cold still. Mara insisted it was just the old structure heat trapped in the walls. But even she faltered when Ruth gasped and clutched her arm. A hiss rose sharp and searing, as though invisible flames licked across the ceiling, the sound of fire raging without light. Elena's camera glitched static bars, streaking her lens as though the air itself burned into film. Jamal cursed, waving his arms around his head, and then he screamed. The hiss turned into a roar, an unseen inferno erupting all around him, the crack and snap of flames swallowing oxygen, though not a single flame was visible. His clothes began to smoke, skin blistering in front of them, his body cooking from heat they could not see. Ruth shrieked and tried to pull him out, but Jamal thrashed, batting her away, eyes rolling white as the sound of fire drowned his cries. His screams were torn apart by the roar, high and raw, layered with the sounds of fat, sizzling flesh popping like wood in a furnace. Elena dropped the camera to cover her face, sobbing that she could smell him, smell the burning smell, the truth of invisible fire. Mara tried to command to pull him free, but Jamal's knees buckled and the sound of bones splitting under heat cracked through the chamber, brittle and final. He collapsed, twitching body collapsing into ash right before them, no flame, only the echo of an inferno that had never died. Ruth wailed into her hands, shaking her head, rocking back and forth, but the chamber echoed with lingering crackles, faint pops of ember that didn't exist, the hiss of smoke escaping lungs that were no longer there. Mara dragged them out of the room, shouting to move to survive, to stay away from the walls. But Ruth's sobs followed them louder than orders. They stumbled down the corridor, shadows lunging with every swing of their lamps. From behind them, the sound of a door slamming rattled the air, a cell locking itself with cruel satisfaction. Elena begged them not to go deeper, begged to find the way back to the hatch. But Mara snapped that the hatch was sealed, that their only path was forward. They entered another chamber, smaller, lined with benches where guards must have sat. On one wall hung rusted implements, saws, blades, clamps, some broken, others still sharp. Ruth gagged at the sight. Elena lifted her lens with shaking hands, but Mara pushed forward, refusing to stop. That was when a sound slid into the room, slick and wet, the unmistakable noise of a blade cutting through muscle, the fibrous rip of meat being carved. Elena dropped the camera, covering her ears, screaming, "No, no, no." But the sound grew louder, filling every corner. It became a symphony of knives, slicing, sawing, tearing the chorus of prisoners, butchered piece by piece. Ruth collapsed to her knees, sobbing into her palms, whispering that she could feel it on her skin. And then she was lifted. Chains that hadn't been there before slithered down from the ceiling hooks, swinging. The creak of the chains was unbearable, screeching as the hooks descended, scraping against one another in hunger. One hooked into Ruth's shoulder with no resistance, tearing cloth, tearing flesh, and she screamed so loud the corridor quaked. Her scream was echoed back by the bunker, layered with dozens more, shrill and broken, a choir of prisoners cut alive. Elena and Mara lunged, grabbing her legs, but more chains came snaring her wrists, her other shoulder, her waist. They pulled in opposite directions, flesh tearing under invisible blades. The sound was grotesque, wet, ripping sinew, parting the grind of bone, separating from its joint. Blood sprayed across the walls, warm, fresh, though the hooks seemed to drink it, glistening, vanishing the moment it touched them. Ruth's body tore into pieces, head rolling to the floor with a hollow thump. The sound of her last breath came out as a gurgle drowned by the wet smack of her organs hitting the grate. Elena collapsed in convulsions of sobs, clutching her head, repeating Ruth's name like a prayer that no god could hear in this place. Mara dragged her away, whispering that they had to move, that stopping meant dying, though she too shook with horror. Behind them, the chains clinked together, laughing in their scrapes, swaying as though celebrating their feast. Two remained now, just two, and the bunker hungered still. They staggered into the guard station, and the air cold, cruelly quiet for the first time. Silence heavy enough to crush lungs. Mara tried to steady her light, but her hand trembled so badly the beam danced. Elena muttered that they were cursed for opening this place, cursed for disturbing the dead. Mara grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes, telling her they were still alive, telling her they could outlast the echoes. But the bunker listened, and the bunker disagreed. From the far wall came a slam, like a heavy table driven against stone, the metallic scream of bolts tearing loose. They spun just as the interrogation table they had passed earlier trembled, shuddering, as though something pressed down on it. Elena backed away, tears running, whispering, "No, no, not again." The sound grew louder, the scrape of metal against concrete and the hideous crunch of bones splintering under pressure, skull after skull, breaking against the table's steel surface. Mara realized too late what was happening. The table was meant for heads, and now it demanded one. The chains whipped out again, catching Elena by the neck, dragging her forward before Mara could move. Her screams ripped through the chamber, choked by the tightening metal coil, the sound of vertebrae snapping under strain, one by one. Mara lunged, clawing at the chain. But the table itself seemed to rise to meet Elena's face, slamming her head down with a final crash and the explosion of bone and brain against steel echoing like a gunshot. Blood sprayed across Amara's face, hot and blinding as the chain snapped taut in the wet squelch of Elena's skull collapsing, echoing through the chamber like laughter. Mara screamed her name, but there was no answer, only the hollow drip of blood falling from the table to the floor. Now she was alone. The bunker had taken 4, and only one heart still beat. Mara stumbled, sobbing, smeared in blood, whispering their names. Theo, Jamal, Ruth, Elena, whispering that she was sorry, whispering that she should have closed the hatch. The silence that followed was cruel, broken, only by the slow drip, drip, drip of blood echoing like a clock counting down. Then came the final sound. It was the low, deliberate creak of a door closing the massive hinges, groaning the slam, echoing until it felt like the whole earth locked itself shut. Mara screamed, clawing at the walls, running to where the stair had been, but the way was gone, sealed by stone. The bunker had finished its work. Only her death remained. Mara staggered alone through the corridor, her lamp flickering as though the light itself no longer wished to be here. Blood sticky on her face, her hands trembling with exhaustion, her mind unraveling with every echo. She whispered the names of the others, each syllable trembling like prayer: Theo, Jamal, Ruth, Elena. But the bunker swallowed the names greedily, repeating them back, not as memory, but as mockery. From deep within the stone, the sound of chains slithering returned, dragging, slow dragging, heavy, each link gnashing like teeth on bone. She stumbled toward the stairwell, though she already knew it was gone, sealed by the living stone. But desperation pushed her forward. Behind her came the clank of shackles dropped onto steel, the metallic screech of locks, turning be themselves, doors slamming into waves, boom after boom, until the air shook with the sound of a prison that never wanted to open again. She reached the landing, panting her hand, slapping the wall, her nails peeling against the rough concrete. But the hatch was no longer there, only welded steel that had never been meant to move. Mara pounded her fists against the wall, screaming for help, but her screams came back. Doubled, tripled voices, not her own, distorted, layered with the cries of hundreds of prisoners screaming, with her screaming through her, until her own voice was no longer hers at all. She spun back against the wall as the corridor ahead darkened shadows, pooling like liquid iron, and from the center of the dark came the figure. Shackled wrists, shredded uniform sockets, hollow skin scorched into blackened strips. It was not one prisoner, but all of them fused in torment, an army of agony. The sound it carried was unbearable, a chorus of screams stretched into infinity chains, clanging in perfect rhythm, with the throb of hatred, the hiss of unseen fire. The wet rip of blades cutting meat, the crunch of skulls smashed against steel. The choking gasp of necks breaking all of it, rising together into one symphony of torment that battered her ears until blood ran from them. She fell to her knees, clutching her skull, sobbing that she was sorry she should never have opened this place, that she would close it if she could. But the figure only lifted its shackled arms, and the chains slithered forward. The links dragged across the floor with shrill squeals, scraping sparks of sound, as though the metal itself thirsted for her bones. One chain looped around her ankle, another coiled her wrist, another found her neck, and she gagged, clawing at it, nails snapping bloody against the steel. The chain tightened, every twist, punctuated by the crack of vertebrae pop, 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 until her breath came out as a wet, bubbling rasp. She kicked, she screamed, but the chains only pulled tighter, drawing her toward the figure. The last sound she heard was her own skull striking the iron wall with a hollow crack, followed by the sickening crunch as the chains twisted her neck with a snap sharp enough to echo forever. Her body went limp, dragged into the dark, vanishing like the others, leaving only silence. Then it came the final act of the bunker. The groan of the hatch above shook the wall's hinges, creaking as if dragged by the earth itself. And with a thunderous slam, the door sealed forever, the sound reverberating through stone like the heartbeat of something ancient and satisfied. The screams did not stop. They faded into whispers, whispers into hisses, hisses into silence, until all that remained was the faint drip of water on rust and the eternal memory of chains that had once learned to feed. The war bunker remained hidden, silent its truth, buried its prisoners, never freed its hunger, never ending. The team of 5 would never be found. The forest above would grow thick again, roots twining over concrete, burying the evidence. But if someone someday found the hatch and chose to open it, they would not find dust. They would find sound, waiting, breathing alive. And in that silence, if you listen closely, you might still hear it now. The scrape of chains, the slam of doors, the echo of screams that should never have lasted this long. If this story made your heart race and your skin crawl, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another chilling tale from the shadows. Share this with a friend who dares to listen in the dark, and tell us in the comments, would you open the bunker door or leave it sealed forever?